I'm here with the Eric Sirotkin. That's it. That's the way that I can say your surname. It's Sirotkin.
Sirotkin, yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
So
it's not as scary as it sounds.
Yeah, that's it. So I met Eric on the last September when I was in a retreat in South Africa. And so when I met Eric, I feel my heart beat hard, and I recognize him as a soulmate and inspired in Ubuntu philosophy. I can say that I can be because he's being, and so that's our connection. And I don't want to introduce himself. I want you that can share us about you, insights about yourself. So you can say a little bit about you. And actually, I want to ask him something. Who is the guy that choose a law school? And now when we can see this guy that choosing law school, what you can see about yourself, about your life in this journey as a lawyer.
Right. Okay. I've been a lawyer for over 40 years, which is a long time, but I could say that I'm still an active trial lawyer, and I go to state and federal court. I am someone who has always been an activist, and so very young, my parents took me to protests against the war in Vietnam. They had a big influence on me because they shared a sense of equality for all people with me, and that was a basis. And so when I went to school and later to law school, I became very moved that law should have purpose. In those days, it was purely like social justice, I felt was the purpose of being a lawyer, making change, doing something like that. And then in the 1990s, I got involved in South Africa, and I went with a group of lawyers to a constitution-making conference with the African National Congress and other groups in South Africa. And we worked on a proposed Bill of Rights and gave input. And I was so moved by the insights of people there, the efforts of struggle for so long, but with a particular vision that I didn't quite understand at the time, but it seemed so special. And then when I went in later, I was an election observer when President Mandela was elected. And I then went back and coordinated an international monitoring project of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that had a huge impact on my view of the law and about humanity. And so I coordinated this project. And let me say, I had a lawyer, I had an office, I had some staff at the time, I had different responsibilities, but I always took on something that fueled my soul more and something I was looking for. And as working on the Truth Commission, I got to work with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which was an honor and was someone who modeled a lot of things that are important in my life. And one of those I sat and talked to him about was called Ubuntu. And he told me, because the law actually said there shall be Ubuntu rather than victimization. And that's what said, and that the ideas were not victims and perpetrators, but we're all in the soup together. And so I went ahead and I talked to the Archbishop one morning. I said, "What is this Ubuntu?" And he smiled and he said, "There's no direct translation," he said, in Western terms. He said, it is that I am human through my relations with others. What I do to you, I do to myself, that we are interconnected. And he said, the solitary individual is a contradiction in terms, that we're corporate, that we're connected. And so it was like, wow, and this is what the law says. And this was fascinating to me and really felt it in my heart. And I came back, and after some time I did, I'm mostly a human rights lawyer. I do civil rights, some jail cases, some mostly employment cases, people wrongfully fired. I do a lot of labor work. And so I came back and I started integrating this Ubuntu into my practice. And it had a big impact on me. And I did work in Korea and going to North Korea several times, and South Korea, in Washington, trying to make peace, because I've always worked in the peace area, if you would, also. And I felt that Ubuntu held the key to that. And so I founded this project that I am so grateful, Fernanda, that is a board member of, the Ubuntuworks the Ubuntuworks project, originally the Peace Education Project. And it is about putting these Ubuntu ideas everywhere into our institutions. And so that drives me now. My work drives me, using law as a healing, so that I am, as the lawyer healed some, the client, even the other side, breaking down us and them, but and doing that powerfully. I don't think you have to shy away from strongly representing your client, but you do it with a sense of listening and compassion, and that changes everything. So that's been a lot of my legal trajectory, my legal road, and that is a little bit about me, I guess. I've written some books on some of this journey. So
amazing. I want to talking about your book too a little bit later, because it's amazing. It's very inspiring. But I want to ask you, when you come back to South Africa in 19th and feel all the stuff that you feel inside of you and decide to change your practice, how is the reaction with your law firm, your colleagues? So how you deal with that? Because this change this mindset, I think it's the most trigger things that we are as a lawyer wants to try to change. And so I don't know if you know, in Brazil we have a lot of lawyers. It's the country that has there is the most lawyers in the world. So we have a lot of law schools. I think it's because we have this traditional kind of colonization that we think lawyer, doctors, and an engineer is the best things that we can do as a person. So as a professional, so we have a lot of lawyers, and we living in a country that we don't have justice. So we're living in very unsafe place. We have a sense of no justice. So very insecure place to live. We need to take care about our survivor. So it's a kind of paradox, has so much lawyers and there is so much insecurity to live. And I talking about insecurity about survivor. So it's, and in this way we are look like South Africa too. We have a very common things in this way as a culture that suffering a lot with the colonization process. So when in my case, when I started to changing my practice, a lot of people getting scared, my parents getting scared about that. So I want to hear your experience with changing your practice to with your colleagues, your parents, your family, and so if you can.
Well, when I first came back from South Africa and did start to change my practice, I needed less people, and so I had a lot of people working with me, and I had to change that. And they sat down with me with a tape recorder and said, "Okay, what's the plan?" And I knew as an employment lawyer, I had trained them very well, and so the reaction was first resistance and fear, and somehow that I wasn't going to bring in enough money, then that this was not work that people would pay for unless you, at that time it was a choice. My initial choice was I go to court now, but the initial choice was not to go to court, to contact employers and say, here's the problem, here's the issue. I'm not going to take this to court, so I'm reasonable, we can talk. And whereas it's fully prepared to go to court, so I can hand it to the litigation lawyer any day, but you're going to do better dealing with me. And actually the receptivity, the reception I got from the other side, if you will, was very interesting. They dialed down their competition a bit, and they listened better to me because I was saying, look, I think this case could do real well in court, but you can deal with me right now in a reasonable way to structure something that makes sense for everyone. And so I stopped writing the letter. I call it, do you know the term bigot? Someone who's racially biased. Mm-hmm. So I stopped writing the dear bigot letter. Do you want to talk? Mm-hmm. Because you can't call names and then expect people not to get defensive and want to fight. That just, you create that atmosphere. And so if there's less name calling, and I used a lot more mediation language, such as instead of you have a problem, we have a problem here. Instead of this is an inflexible demand, my client aspires to land on their feet, to get another job, to be successful, instead of you will give us this and this. And I found that learning to be a mediator, learning mediation language, opened up hearts and minds that way. And so that was important. I think for other lawyers, I think there was confusion about, is he still practicing? What does he do? And so that confusion is one thing. I wrote some articles for the bar publication to try to explain it more, to get it out there, because as I know you understand with conscious contracts and the great work that you do, that you recognize that there's power in what we're talking about here, that it's very natural. It's a process that is, the Archbishop used to call it, Ubuntu is the essence of being human, the essence of being human. So we have an opportunity to craft our profession in a way that reflects human nature. And that, to me, when you do it clearly and from a point of strength, people get it. People understand. And while some people will say, well, I can't ever do that, or I'm not drawn to do that, it's a choice thing. But what we see in lawyers, I don't know if you have that many lawyers. I mean, the United States probably is second with the most per capita lawyers, because we have a lot of lawyers too. And we have a lot of lawyers who get burned out and who quit being lawyers and stop being lawyers around year 7 or 8, usually after doing it for a number of years and either living like they need to be detached and separate from their client, which is not natural, or living that they have to be a warrior and being in battle, and they get battle fatigue, get tired from the battle. And so what we find in practicing from a more integrative, holistic, I call it wellness or nonviolent advocacy, those kinds of ways to practice help us be healthier ourselves, because we're connected to something to be proud of, to reflect how we're doing. I tell clients, the client may come in, I want you to shoot them, I want you to kill them, and they're angry. And sometimes most lawyers jump up and down with them, and both sides get angry. We're going to kill them, we're going to crush them, we're going to do this. But instead, when I tell lawyers, look, I tell clients, you're in pain, right? And you were treated really poorly. I'm going to represent you, and I'm going to model for the other side how you wanted to be treated, so that you are being treated so that our case represents the highest we can be, not getting down in the low battle and that area, that we're going to work from respect, dignity, and be good listeners and be compassionate people, because that's how you wanted to be treated. And that person says, yes, that is how I wanted to be treated. They understand that. Then I say, it's not time for us to start acting like them. Tutu once said, don't become like the system you oppose. Don't become like the system you oppose. And it's so easy to get down in the mud and become, I don't like this, but I'm going to go down and I'm going to be a good warrior because it's for the right issue. Well, it's not it's not something that we need to do, and we don't feel good doing that. And I say, I won't shoot them, the other side, but I might spin them around enough they shoot themselves in the foot, that they shoot themselves in the foot. And I say, that's them. That's, I'm not going to do that. And the clients usually like that. Yeah, you go ahead, you spin them around a little bit. And we spin them around with truth, and we spin them around with a sense of justice, and we spin them around with not engaging in the fight. And the other lawyers get very confused at that. They're not used to that.
Yeah.
And so that's just very quickly. I had an angry lawyer once who came into the court deposition where they're taking the client's testimony, and he was throwing the papers over to my client, and he seemed to take this very personal, seemed very angry. And at one point, I stopped the deposition. I said, we're going to take a break. Mr. Holmes is tired. And he said, I am not tired. I am not, the other lawyer. And he was upset. And I said, yeah, well, we're going to take this break. And we went out of the room. We let the energy shift. We came back in the room. He was different at that point. He flew back to Washington, D.C., and he went ahead and assigned the case to someone else locally, and we settled a good settlement at some point. And then I would get a Christmas card from him every year for a number of years. It was very, very different. But so you how better is that? Whereas he wanted to get in the fight with me. He wanted me to shout back at him. He wanted to engage like this. And when I choose not to, there's power in that. This is Gandhian nonviolence. This is not weak. This is powerful. And so recognizing the power in these techniques empowers you, your client, and does something magically human to the other side.
Amazing, Eric. I'm a very lucky person because I have the experience that has a dinner with you and your colleague that worked together in that times in 19s in South Africa. Do you remember? And saw you teaching in a law school in South Africa. It was incredible experience. And that's another point that I want to talking with you, because I've never been myself as a teacher, because I recognize that I don't have nothing to spare, to spread, nothing to say to other person as a traditional lawyer. So I've never interested in teaching, nothing. And it's really true, because now I recognize that as a traditional lawyer, I really don't have nothing to say, because it's something that getting me sick. And I was very sick when I starting to see what's happened with me, why I take medicine to go to my office, to go to my home. That is something very wrong. And when I was a teenager and choose be a lawyer, I have the sensation that as a lawyer, I can take a voice and a space for other people, and in other hands, take a voice and a speech to me, to space to me too. So doing that, because I really believe that we just can do in a word something to treat ourselves. So when I decide to be a lawyer, I want to cure myself in somehow. And so this is my medicine. This is my cure. And I feel very, very sick as a traditional lawyer. And when I around my 40, I decide to stop everything. I'm a traditional litigation lawyer, and I want to give up and start another kind of stuff. But I feel sick too, because there is something inside of me that really believe that I have a way as a lawyer. I need to be a lawyer, but how be a lawyer in a traditional way that not connecting with people, and when I start to change in my practice, there is something raised inside of me, a necessity and insight, and there is another kind of, how can I say that? The people asking me to talking about my experience too, and it's a magic happening. I'm very happy to be a teacher. I don't know. Yeah. I don't like actually to nominate myself as a teacher, because I think it's a change all the time. I say something, and because you say something, I can say another thing, and so it's a big change. And not be a lawyer as a teacher, not being a teacher. So I want to know how you be a teacher. You are a teacher as a traditional lawyer. You are in the law school to teaching something in the traditional way, or you just be a teacher when you change your practice too?
Well, a long time ago, when I was in my 20s, I was asked to teach a course at the law school. And I taught a course. All my students were older than me, I think, but I taught modern employment law. And then a professor left to go work in government for a couple of years, and they had me teach labor law. And so I was in my late 20s teaching part-time that way. So I like that. I like the exchange. But you see, teaching, what I think keeps us from being educators, teachers in our life is this insecurity somehow that we're not enough, or we don't have enough, or someone knows more than we do. And in reality, this philosopher Heidegger used to say to teach meant to let learn, let allow to learn. And so in South Africa, during the elections, we went around with mediators in the countryside who would mediate conflict in the weeks up before the election. They would go into a township and a village where people were arguing or fighting or someone had been killed, and they would bring the two sides together. Not about that conflict, but the goal was to create an atmosphere for a free and fair election. Not, I mean, both Brazil, the US, we've had these crazy elections.
Yeah.
And we know that it's not just about, do we count the ballots right? Do we count the numbers? What they did in South Africa when Mandela was elected, and there was no violence across the whole country during the elections, which over 3 days of voting, it was beautiful, is they said we have to create an atmosphere for a free and fair election. And a teacher goes to, with other people, and creates an atmosphere for learning. Mm-hmm. And the atmosphere you create is how you listen to the students, how you listen to other lawyers, how you listen to people's pain and concern, how you, like when I deal with clients, I ask a question of clients a lot of the times, what brings you joy? What brings you joy? Ask the client. The client comes to a lawyer because of some problem. We don't think to ask that. But if we don't know what brings them joy, how do we help with their healing process? How do we help them get out there? And so sometimes by the questions you ask, you are educating, you are teaching. By the questions you pose, by the way you listen, those all take us to a deeper level of humanity. And if my law practice is about that, it goes so much deeper in so many ways. And this is not some notion that isn't real. This has existed in cultures around the world, non-dominant cultures. I mean, if you go in Brazil, is it the Caxinawa? The natives in some of the rainforest natives have a term called chi. And it means half of what's in you is also in me. Half of what's in me is also in you. This is Ubuntu, really. But all our countries, indigenous people tend to have that notion. And so if half of what me is in you, how I treat you becomes pretty important, because it's if we're not separate, if we're connected in some way. And so I look for ways in the law to connect with my client, to connect with the other side, to make a difference that way, and to make a difference not just in the case, but in the community, in the country, and on the planet.
Mhm.
And if you're thinking of these things, then everything shifts. It's remarkable and joyous.
Incredible. Yeah, I really believe in what you say. And so now you have this project, Ubuntu project, and you, as I understand, and be a part of that. uh, I I saw that you have you want to spread this idea in the world and impact it and somehow this. And so I want you that explain about the Ubuntu project and the um, and how you can spread this idea and guide us in this mindset, in this philosophy.
Okay, and you go to ubuntuworks.org, ubuntuworks.org when people want to learn more about it. But it is the idea that our institutions being our workplaces, our government, our education system, our courts, our way we resolve conflict, have lived in an age of separation of us and them in a lot of ways, or the individual is more important than everyone else. And so if these institutions and corporations begin to operate from a point of connection rather than separation, everything shifts. When you focus on what unites us rather than what separates us, change happens. Mm-hmm. And so if we take a workplace, we can show, and the Ubuntuworks project is meant to bring stories and scientific studies and other things together to demonstrate to a business that if you infuse, if you interject, if you put in Ubuntu-based principles into your workplace, people get sick less, people get more productive, and the company will actually make more money. Yeah. At that point, a head of a company says, make more money? Oh, I want to hear about this. And so we're putting together the material to show that it isn't about aggression and domination and us versus them and master and servant law, which we've called employment law. It is about working together, that cooperation increases productivity, that compassion helps relations in the workplace and reduces violence, makes people more excited. How you mentioned going into work, how you felt going into work, and in a traditional workplace with traditional work relationships. If relationships are different at work and they feed you, if some workplaces do a practice at the beginning of the workday, get everyone together to share something personal. I mean, you're supposed to leave that at home usually. But if I came to work and everybody went around and we did that for 20 minutes before the workday started, there are studies and other things that show that workplace is happier, people come, there's less absences, and people come there working harder because they start to care about each other as human beings. Simple things can change workplaces, can change how we train students on these principles, how we, so we're going to do school curriculums for teachers to use, do teacher training. The Ubuntuworks project is going to expand this notion of different types of law, collaborative law, restorative justice, integrative law, holistic law. All these areas use Ubuntu-based principles, but very few identify themselves as doing so. And so what we want to do is to support these groups to become more the traditional and not be alternative. And in the end, they are the more natural human way to approach human relationship. And so how do you change human relationship in our world, except where do we spend most of our day? At work. Well, if we keep working the same way with the top-down decision makers and not listening, your boss, tuning you out, they don't want to hear things. If we keep living this way at work for 8 hours a day, how are we going to change? So we need to get into the core of where the power is. And the power is in corporations who look at their shareholders, but perhaps need to look at what we call stakeholders, people who have an interest in this, like their local community, like the planet, like other things. So corporations, workplaces, schools, governments, courts, medicine, if people change and begin to change their relationships there, then those power bases are so influential that we see great change happening, reduced violence, more compassion, then we can deal with issues like world hunger and refugees and war. Because you can use Ubuntu. I've used Ubuntu-based principles in peace building in Korea, and it gives you a model. It gives language to people involved in those discussions to look at conflict differently. And so it's exciting.
Yeah, you say something very interesting to see around the world when you're thinking about our ancestral original people. I have a little experience in a place near an India, in Nepal. And so this country has joy as a base of the principle to develop their government stuff. I don't know if you know about the Bhutan. So I spent some times in Bhutan to try to get in connection with the experience that I have to see our Indians here in Brazil, because as you said, they have the same base to live on. So they don't see themselves separate for the nature, for the other people. They see everything is connection. And so how we lose this connection. And I think that as a human being, as a lawyer, no matter what the professional that you choose, we need to going through being this connection again. And so I think what you say in the Ubuntu project is very powerful, for that we can see that we are connection, no matter the word that you use. This is on base of being human being. And so and see and we have this experience in our retreat. There is something very powerful that when you don't feel in this way, it's something that scares us a lot. It's not being part of, not belong. So it's amazing that you're thinking about to put all this practice, alternative practice, together, as we can recognize ourselves as a part of the systems. And so there is not a traditional system against alternative system. We're living together. And so how you can support us, because we can fight to each other. It's not a big deal. So I feel very happy to hear you say about that.
Well, I love that you bring up Bhutan because of their view of happiness. I mean, as a national goal, that they have an index to measure happiness. Well, I mean, it should be a simple concept that people should have happiness. In the United States, we had something called the Declaration of Independence when our country rose, that talked about the pursuit of happiness. Well, it's interesting because after that in 1776 came about, by 1787, when Constitution was developed, by the Declaration of Independence said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they changed it in the Constitution to life, liberty, and property. And happiness was nowhere to be found. And of course, they were slave owners and everything. And I mean, look, there's a reason we cross the country and we have the Maori concept in New Zealand. We have called Aka in Hawaii. We have Native Alaskans have a concept called Yuk. We have the Buddhists have a concept called interbeing and connected. There's a reason these exist everywhere. And my view is that the brutality of colonialism, which was a brutal history of conquering people and domination of one over the other, the only way to deal with the pain of that, for Mandela used to say the oppressed and the oppressors were both bound in chains. Both the oppressed and the oppressor were both bound up in the chains, that you had to free everybody. The conquerors, the colonial, the conquistadors, the different people who came from different countries to control and dominate, witnessed some horrendous things. There were killings and genocide and terrible things that happened in other parts of the world, whether it's Africa, South America, in the United States, in the Native Americans. They're terrible, painful stories. How do we usually deal with pain as human beings? We cover our eyes, we run, we go the other direction, we shut down a part of us that is natural. And so I think it's understandable when you put yourself in their shoes that they couldn't say half of what's in me is in you because I just killed you. I controlled you. I enslaved you. If I believed that I was enslaving myself and killing a part of me, how could I live with myself? And so we developed a philosophy of domination around the planet through colonialism. And so the movements to decolonialize the world, to step back from that, is not just to tell the truth, the history, but is to reconcile, like they tried in South Africa and are still working on. And if you reconcile conflict, if reconciliation is a goal, then you do that, then you have to acknowledge the connection with other people. And if the people starving, the people who do not have enough food, the people who have no housing and are unhoused in the streets, and the people who have needs are not separate from you, then you have to do something about it. But if you live from this, whether you call it colonialism, whether you call it separation, or whatever you want to call it, if you live from the idea that that people have and people don't have, and that people are suffer has nothing to do with me. It's that their problem is over there. Then these problems just continue. But if we can open up and train a new generation in Ubuntu thinking, whatever you call it, and you train a whole new generation in that, and you drop it in so it's less scary and it's productive into businesses and corporations and other places, then boom, then there's a certain tipping point where a shift can happen. And at that point, the world changes in ways that we've only imagined. So I think it's that simple.
Yeah, that's the point. We not get in touch with the simple things. I don't know. So, but we said that we told us something very interesting about happiness that I've never heard about it in American Constitution, and a little about my experience in Bhutan. I need to go there because it's I think there is a few countries in the world that don't suffer a colonization process, and Bhutan escape of that. And so and when I was there thinking about happiness, I'm very triggered about how can they develop that in a government basis. So something so distant to me. And so I have experienced to have a little internship there, and talking with the person that is responsible to put the search of happiness in the government. There is a department there to do that. And so, and when he started to talking with me, what is happiness in Bhutan basis? And he said, it's not the Western philosophy about happiness. It's not something individual. When you're talking about happiness, and happiness about the community, because it's the community happiness with in that way, they can support the individual when they have a problem. So it's not about to know if you are happy, but your community is happy if it is, you know, you have a problem and you can support you because everybody is involved, get in touch. And wow, and I think it's amazing. That's it. It's not an individual concept. And so, Eric, I want to spend a week to talking with you. More than that, I really wish that we have a whole life to get in touch and share a lot. But I want to talking a little about your book that I have the experience to
okay.
because it's amazing.
Okay.
When I saw the title, I can believe so powerful that so witness a lawyer's journey for litigation to liberation. I know it's about your journal. It's about all the things that we're talking about, and so I want to know what is the inspire you to share this, and so talking where you find that.
Yeah, I mean, you write. Everyone has their stories, and sometimes fortunate to have some experiences that I've done that some people are interested in, whether South Africa or Korea. And there's parts in there a lot about that. But I wanted to write about the journey we take to change our angle of vision, how we look at things, how we look at conflict. And I wanted to do it in a personal way. I had all these old journals. I don't know if you ever, you write in a journal. And so I used to have these books with, 10 pages, 15 pages, and then blank, 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 really pretty books. And I I always committed to fill them up and never rarely did. And but I had them all in a big box. So I thought they were useless. I said, oh my God, if someone found these someday, or I should just burn them. And I kept them, which is good because it helped me put my mind frame back in different time periods of what was going on in my head. And they were a little better than I thought. And so they gave me some of the material to be accurate. I mean, when you write a memoir, you hope at least 95% of it is accurate. It's supposed to be about your life. And it isn't my whole life, and I had to chop a lot out because it was like a book like this, and then you cut it down. So then you're cutting out things in your life. I mean, it's quite a process because you have to let go of certain things because you have to maintain a story, something that makes sense in the flow. And witness just I wrote it over a number of years, and most of it in a matter of 6 or 7 months at one point. And the original title and the original draft I wrote in 10 years before that, and it was called the Ubuntu era, and it was about shifting our institutions from, just like I'm doing now, remarkably, from how there are great examples, and that's what we're going to show in the Ubuntuworks project, is there are powerful examples of people doing amazing things all over the planet that we don't hear about. We hear the worst. We hear just what the news tells us. And in reality, there's such amazing things that people are doing in communities all over the planet, and we need to give voice to those. And so this was my effort to give voice to different things I've done that I thought people would benefit from, that might make a difference for them. I'm a big believer in what I call the energetics of protest, which is if there's 5 people on the street corner, like, end the war, you drive past them and you say, how are those 5 people going to end the war? I mean, there's only 5 of them. But one of them is a young person who goes on to become the CEO of a big company someday. And that moment of courage, that moment of standing on that corner for something, may change the whole way that they work with their thousands of workers, because they were out on that corner that day. So maybe the demonstration wasn't about ending the war, but it was support for that person. It was that you took a step with positive intention toward a bigger vision of our world. That if you do that, don't focus on the result. That's where you get frustrated. The world didn't change today. The war didn't end. The coal mine is still operating. Whatever your issue is, stand tall, do it with integrity, do it with compassion and Ubuntu in mind, and do it in a way of positive intention. And when you do set these intentions in motion and you model this, there may be someone driving by in a car who sees that and goes on and changes their whole life. And you never even knew those people drove by and saw you. So the book, and hopefully my life, is a bit about trying to put a model out that inspires people to get creative and use imagination, but live from that point that we can change the imaginative picture of the world. Bertrand Russell used to say, change our picture of the world. Don't accept it. You can stand for something different, whatever it is, big or small, and you can have a big impact.
Wow, so beautiful. Yeah, it's delightful to read that there's a lot of pictures of this experience that we have in South Africa, in Korea. It's nice to see too. The way that the book collected this story is amazing. Thank you for put this in the world and share with us.
Okay.
So I want to say that you really inspire me a lot, and I wish this story can inspire us here in Brazil a lot. I wish we can see you here one day. I think
it's in my plan someday.
Yeah, it's in my plan too.
Okay, very good.
So thank you a lot for this conversation, and let's do this change in the world.
Anytime. You are a wonderful change agent, Fernanda, and the world is better because you're in it every morning. So go forth and help to keep making a difference. And we're so honored to have you be part of the Ubuntuworks project. And may you have a beautiful day, and may everyone find that point of joy that lights up their life in everything they do. And we do not have to settle for the world as is. So
thank you, Eric, a lot.